Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the White House. We are so delighted to have everybody here. Tom and I were just joking backstage that we have been working on this and we feel like we're about to give birth, but this is probably longer than most pregnancies that we've been working on having a Workers' Voice Summit here at the White House. This is something the President cares a great deal about. You'll be hearing from him a couple of times today. He was directly involved in the planning of our program, and we know it's going to be successful because of all of you who are here today. And looking around this room, I see so many people who have been working with us since before day one on lifting up worker voices and ensuring that they are heard and ensuring that their needs and their values are met in the workplace. And so I want to thank the labor leaders who are here today. I want to thank the workers who are here today. I met a school teacher backstage, which I always have a perfect fondness for. The business here who are on the cutting edge and who are transforming our businesses and who recognize that it isn't a choice between workers and businesses conflicting, it's workers and businesses together. The academics, the researchers, everyone who is here today, we want to thank you and we want to welcome you for coming. As you'll hear from the President, we've made a lot of progress over the last 6 3/4 years. We don't have to remind the people in this room, because you know firsthand that our economy was in a free fall when he took office. Our unemployment rate was going up as high as 10%, and now it's down to 5.1. That's progress. 67 straight months of private sector job growth. That's progress, right? You can clap. That's a good thing. He believed in the automobile industry when some did not. Now they're back. That's progress. He believed in our cities. They're coming back. That's progress. He believed in focusing on what we can do to have a clean environment where we leave our planet better for our children. We're still working hard on that, but that's progress. But what we also know, and you all know firsthand, is there is a growing inequality in our country. And there is a direct correlation, according to our Council on Economic Advisors who are here today, between unions shrinking and that growing equality. Back in the day when unions were prevalent around our country, we had a closer gap. And as unions make up a smaller and smaller fraction of our representation of our workers, that gap is growing. And so the challenge for us today is to really ask ourselves some tough questions. What are we going to do to ensure that the 21st century workplace does meet the needs and the values of the 21st century worker? We had an incredible summit last year on working families, and we focused on issues such as raising the minimum wage, making sure we have equal pay for equal work, workplace flexibility, paid leave and paid sick leave. We're still the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a federal paid leave policy. How are we going to be globally competitive without that? The President has called on Congress to pass legislation that would provide both sick time and paid leave. Won't surprise you, they've not acted on that yet. But the good news is cities and states around the country are. And so we've taken our campaign, and Tom Perez and I have traveled our country, and we've highlighted cities and states that have taken these issues and realized that we have to create an environment where everybody succeeds. And that companies that invest in their employees, well, let me say first, companies that listen to their employees, companies who give them a voice, employers who know they should demand that voice, and where you have that combination working together, you find that the companies, what happens? Their employees are more loyal, they're more productive, they get ideas about innovation and efficiency from the people who are actually out there on the front lines innovating and being creative. Who better to listen to than the people who are working in your businesses to figure out how to improve your business, how to make sure you're globally competitive? We know that diversity is a strength, and that every company, no matter how large or their size right now, has to compete in a global marketplace. That's just as a result of technology. Our world is shrinking. Well, if you want to do that, then you better make sure that you have a diverse workforce that reflects the world that we live in and recognize that diversity is, in fact, a strength. And so how do we lift up and empower workers? How do we have employers enlighten themselves about how this is good for business and good for economy and good for our working families out there? And what are the best practices? And there isn't a one-size-fits-all. We know that in this room. We're not going to leave here today and say, this is the one thing that we know if we all do, it's the silver bullet. But what we do want to do today is to challenge ourselves and to really be willing to get outside of all of our comfort zones and figure out how we can make today a laboratory for change. And if we go into it with that attitude, I'm sure that we're going to come out with some best practices, with some ideas for how we can go back to the people who you all represent and to the folks who are watching online with some fresh and new ideas, because the United States is still the best country in the world. Second to none. People want to come here, people want to invest here, people want to do business here, but what we have to ensure is as our economy grows, it grows for everybody and not just for some, and certainly not just for a few at the very top. So we are all in this together. I think you can tell I'm pretty excited about today. I know our next speaker shares my passion and enthusiasm. We have worked on this together. I'm not going to call him my partner in crime because we're not committing any crimes here, but we do spend an awful lot of time together trying to figure out what we can do collectively to move our country forward. We often say now it's the fourth quarter of the presidency, but I've always known the president was a really good fourth quarter player, but he can't play at the top of his game without each and every one of you. So we know you're all busy. The fact that you made time to come here and be with us today gives us encouragement that we really are going to figure out how the country that we know and love is a one where the worker's voice is paramount, where the worker's voice is supreme, and where business recognize how vitally important it is for them to listen to that important voice. So with that, please welcome the Secretary of Labor, my hero, Tom Perez.
Oh, yes. All right. Good morning. Good morning. It's an honor to have all of you here. It's an honor to have our fellow members of Congress here. It's an honor to have workers here. It's an honor to have business leaders, labor leaders, serial activists, and so many more. You know, people keep asking me, whose idea was this? Here's the answer to that question. It was the president's idea. Because I remember vividly sitting with Valerie and the president and others talking about, as Valerie points out, the progress that we're making as a nation. And talking at the same time about the unfinished business, the understanding that we all succeed when we all succeed, but we all succeed only when we all succeed. And there is understanding across an ideological spectrum that we've got unfinished business. You read what people say across the spectrum. Lloyd Blankfein, too much GDP over the last generation has gone to too few of the people. Janet Yellen, the extent of growing increase in inequality in the United States greatly concerns me. And we know this, we see this. And in my job, I make house calls. And every single day I make house calls and I see the frustrations of workers, the frustrations of businesses. And I met with some workers last night, and they're on my mind. And to a person, what I asked them, the last question I asked them was, what frustrates you most about your current situation? And they said, I feel powerless. There's nobody to speak up for me. These aren't my words, these are their words. I don't have a legitimate voice. The deck is stacked. These aren't my words again, these are what I hear. And everywhere I go, it's clear to me that while we have made progress, we can do better. We can do better than what I saw recently in Detroit, where I met with fast food workers. And one of the workers I met with, the night before, she had slept in her car with her 3 children. We can do better than that. We can do better when I go to Connecticut and I meet Corrine, a bus driver who just gave birth. And because of the absence of paid leave, she took her newborn with her on her school bus route. We can do better than that. We can do better than the person I met who said, I make choices between a gallon of milk and a gallon of gas. That's not who we are as Americans. We can do better in so many different ways. And you know what? It just doesn't have to be like this. And that's why the president wanted to have this day together. Ordinarily, we come out and we roll out a few ideas that we have or a few initiatives. What we're doing today is continuing a conversation. Hashtag start the convo. And for you, this isn't a start. This is a continuation of a very, very important conversation. And the good news is in my travels, I not only hear the frustrations, I see the success stories. I go to the Ford plant in Louisville. I see the partnership between the UAW and the Ford Motor Company. In 2007, 2008, they were on the verge of closure, but coming together around a vision of shared sacrifice leading to shared prosperity. They went from about 800 employees to 4,400 now. Because they came together, they understood that when workers and business work together, when workers have a voice, they understood the power of collective bargaining to bring around a result that could work for everyone, the win-win solutions. And as a kid who grew up in Buffalo, New York, I saw the power firsthand of collective bargaining. And I see the power of voice everywhere I go. I see the power of people like Tom Kartsotis, the founder of Shinola. He had this audacious idea that we could make things like watches and bicycles and leather goods in the city of Detroit. And you go there now, and there's a hop in the step of folks in his factory. One of the people who's his quality control officer, I met her. She was sweeping the floors there, and she said, "Would you give me a chance, because I got game?" And you know what? They gave her a chance, and she does have game. And she's the quality control officer. So I see success. I see success everywhere I go. I see these partnerships in action. And you know what? People are doing better, but we can do better, and we must do more. And that is what today is about. Because you know what? The people in this room, the people in this nation, we all succeed when we all succeed. And the unfinished business is the business of shared prosperity. And I see people all over the place who understand that it's a false choice to suggest that you either take care of your worker or you take care of your bottom line. It's a false choice to suggest that I either have a safe workplace or a profitable workplace. Nobody who goes to work in the morning should come home with an injury, plain and simple. Smart business leaders understand that. And unions have worked hard to protect the right to a safe work environment. And you know what? That's how we can continue to do better. And that's what today is about. You shouldn't have to win the boss lottery to get access to basic protections. And for all too many people, that's what's happening. And so what we're going to do today is have a conversation. And it's going to be a challenging conversation. I predict that during the course of the day today, you will be at times exceedingly frustrated. You will be exceedingly saddened. You will be exceedingly maddened at times. And I predict equally that you will be inspired at times. Because you know what? As I travel this country, I see remarkable people doing remarkable things. I see folks doing what John Lewis said, causing good trouble. Good trouble on behalf of bringing together that American vision of shared prosperity. I see people trying to organize, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but always continuing that struggle. I see businesses and workers coming together around a successful vision of shared prosperity. I see people like Sarita, whom you'll hear from shortly, and so many others, organizing folks in unique ways. And so I'm confident. I'm not just confident, I am certain that you will be inspired. But we cannot ignore the storm clouds. You'll hear from school teachers. You'll hear from other public sector employees who are taking it on the chin. You know, one candidate for president said, you know, the teachers union deserves a punch in the face. That's conduct unbecoming any public official. You know that? I'm a public school parent. And I'm a proud public school parent. And my teachers stay after school to help my kids. And you know what? I want them to do that. I don't want them to have to get a second job because of this assault on public sector unions. I want them to be able to do the job they need to do, which is teach our kids and build a system And I want our home health care workers to do the same. I want our other public sector workers to do the same. And that's why today the conversation is about how we can elevate voice, how we can build an America that works. And again, we've made a very deliberate choice at the president's direction to build a broad audience. And you'll see that today in this first panel, and you'll see it throughout the day. And again, you may agree with some of the things people say. You may disagree with other things. That's not the point. The point is to continue this conversation and to move and to make progress, because we want to make sure that we address this unfinished business. This is what keeps people up at night. This issue of shared prosperity. And when people have a voice in the workplace, workers succeed, businesses succeed, America succeeds. So let's begin that conversation right now. We've got a great panel here. We've got great panels throughout the day. And by the way, you know, if you're going to be attending the end of the day session with the president, it's not us asking him questions. You better be prepared if you're in that audience for him to ask you questions, because that's what he wanted to do, to have a conversation about how we build an America that works for everyone, understanding that we can do better. We must do better. And I'm confident we will do better. So let's start this conversation. I'm really looking forward to having our colleagues in, and let me welcome our first panel. So why don't you come on in, guys? Our first panel is going to really help us to understand, again, the challenges and opportunities that we have here across America. Let me introduce, I will start, I'll just go right from my left and go all the way around. Senator Michael Sanchez has represented District 29 in Bernalillo and Valencia counties in the New Mexico State Senate since 1993. He is an attorney in his other day job, and he currently serves as the majority leader of the Senate in the state of New Mexico. To his right is Sarita Gupta, who is the executive director of Jobs with Justice and the co-director of Carrying Across Generations. Jobs with Justice brings together labor, community, student, and faith voices at the national and local levels to create innovative solutions to the problems confronting working families across the country. Amberine Kahn Baker is a teacher at Rockville High School in Montgomery County, Maryland, where she currently teaches AP Language and Composition. She's also an ambassador for the Montgomery Institute, a partnership between the National Education Association and the Montgomery County Education Association, where she works with teacher leaders across the country on collaborative problem solving to improve the quality of teaching and learning. To her immediate left is Greg Adams, who's the Executive Vice President and Group President of Kaiser Permanente. He has responsibility for the Northern California region. He's also the chair of the California Hospital Association and a member of the board of the California Chamber of Commerce. To his immediate left is Joe Schmidt, who is the operations supervisor at Demoulas Supermarkets, Inc., which is the parent company of Market Basket, a 75-store chain based in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Joe has a similar story to many of the associates working at Market Basket. He was 14 years old when he started at Market Basket, and he was one of the people who was fired for speaking out when the CEO of the company was deposed and then later brought back. The story of Market Basket is a very, very interesting and important story to tell. And last but certainly not least, Robert Hathorn is an auto worker at the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi. He lives there with his wife and his daughter. He spent the first 2 years there as a temporary employee and has transitioned to what's called a Pathways program, and he will tell you his journey through the Nissan plant. So, Sarita, I'm going to start with you if I can, because you have spent seemingly your entire professional life working to address the challenges confronting low-wage workers, working in partnership with business, working in partnership with our friends in organized labor. You've seen the frontline challenges confronting low-wage workers. You've helped forge many of the solutions that have helped people get voice in the workplace. Tell us what you see from the front lines, from both the perspective of the challenges, the opportunities, the solutions that you've been able to forge, and the unfinished business that you see.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to thank you for organizing this amazing summit. It's really terrific to be here and appreciate the invitation to share some thoughts. Let me start by saying it's really an inspiring time. As challenging as it is for working people, I am very hopeful and inspired by just the growing numbers of working men and women who are, in fact, exercising their collective voice right now for change. I think it's important for us to remember that the strongest form of worker voice really comes with union representation, right? Yeah, we should clap. And unions and collective bargaining grant workers the protection, really, that they need in order to express their voice on the job. So we know we need to both protect and expand workers' access to these protections. And we also need to think of new frameworks, given the realities of our economy today and the real obstacles that workers face when trying to exercise their right to form a union. I mean, I've heard countless stories of working men and women who have experienced incredible retaliation when trying to express their voice on the job. So we know that given that reality and the fact that we have more and more part-time and temporary and subcontracted work in our economy, it really means that there's huge limitations to how many workers today can actually access the model of collective bargaining rights that we have currently. So given that, it's inspiring to see movements of workers who are in fact exercising collective action, whether it's domestic workers or it's home care workers, whether it's restaurant workers, taxi workers, adjunct faculty members. I mean, there's endless examples of what we see happening right now. And really what's inspiring about it is working men and women asserting their right to a better life. Right? Because that's what it's really fundamentally about. And their right to their voice and their power to shape the economy and our democracy. So given all of that, all the different examples of great organizing we see out there, I think this idea of how we expand workers' ability, the way I talk about it is how we broaden the theater for organizing, how we broaden the theater for the ways in which workers can come together and collectively negotiate over their conditions is what we need to do. And I just want to close with just sharing an example from San Francisco that we recently worked on at Jobs of Justice. It was one of the key issues we've learned is that too many workers today face erratic schedules. Could you imagine, just imagine for a second, if you have no idea when you're going to work again? How do you plan for childcare? How do you plan for elder care? Medical appointments? Or how do you look your kid in the face and say, I think I can promise I'll make it to your soccer game? And so we realized that this was a growing issue. And so in San Francisco, workers came together, unions, community-based organizations, worker centers, to say, how do we take this issue of scheduling that we know workers are bringing up with their employers and bring it into a public sphere and have a citywide conversation about it. And through that effort, we in fact won predictable and fair schedules for 40,000 working women and men in the retail sector in San Francisco. Yeah, we should clap. It was an enormous victory, but what made it so incredible was not just that we won that policy. You see, it was actually that union and non-union workers together understood that we can win so much when we stand together and have one collective voice. People got to actually build their muscle together of taking collective action. And I think that's really, we got to keep finding pathways in which we can help make that happen more often so working people in this country really can in fact shape our economy and our democracy moving forward.
Great, thank you. Your reference to union organizing and collective action is a good segue to Greg Kaiser. Greg, you and your workforce, you are represented by a number of unions, and you have a strong history of working together with your unions. Talk about what's been the value proposition of that? How has that worked for Kaiser's bottom line, for Kaiser's corporate culture? How has that worked?
Sure. So ours is a story that really starts with labor. We are, I think, the nation's leading, if not the world's leading integrated delivery system. We started with Henry J. Kaiser, Cindy Garfield, who really saw a different way of providing health care. The goal was to really pay providers for prevention, not for sick care. It started during World War II, shipbuilding, the Hoover Dam. When that was over, Henry Kaiser was going to kind of abolish the health plan. The labor organizations approached him and said, no, this is good care, we want it. And so we were formed in some ways out of our relationship with labor. And our early growth really grew as a result of organized labor coming to us and saying, we need and want you in various locations. In 1997, we had a few years leading up to 1997, we had really difficult times in terms of relationships between management and labor. We were struggling financially. Our leadership, management leadership, labor leaders got together and literally talked about there's got to be a better way to do this, and made a commitment to a labor management partnership that really defined how we would own one another's interest and be committed to one another's success. I think at the core of that is a value that says we respect and want to hear the voice of our employees, whether labor or non-labor, organized or not, management or an employee, that we respect and value the role that labor plays in representing our employees. In 2005, we came together in one of our national bargaining sessions, which are really quite amazing because we have hundreds of employees that come together for days and really meet to agree on our collective bargaining agreement. And it starts with everybody being equal. I mean, I sit and engage with employees from all over our company. We start with what are our interests, what are the interests of the organization, the interests of employees, and we own those, and we work through those. And then we come out of that process with an agreement that we all own and that we all lead throughout the period of the agreement. I think when we look at the success that we've had over the past few years especially, we're growing. We are 10 million and growing strong, as we like to say. We are the leader in price, quality, best place to work in all of our markets. And at the core of it, we actually have a concept that we created in 2005 that we refer to as a unit-based team. And a unit-based team is actually kind of a natural working group of employees. It can be a department, it can be a team that's actually together, it can be a specialty division. And those groups are resourced and actually trained on performance improvement processes. So it's not just a group of people coming together. They come together, they have skills, they have resources in terms of data. We today have 4,000 unit-based teams in place across our organization. They're working on upwards of 7,000 performance, and they are working on quality, they're working on service, they're working on our being affordable. And it's serious work. We just did an assessment of 750 teams over an 18-month period. They had achieved savings for the organization of upwards of $20 million. And these teams, and we talk about savings, but our philosophy is that quality first, and if we drive quality, then we absolutely drive service and we achieve affordability. And so we have teams, one, for example, in our Los Angeles Medical Center that reduce the length of stay for cardiac patients, and these are nurses, physicians, EVS workers, everybody coming together and owning what needs to be done. So they reduce the length of the stay better for these patients, better care, better quality, and saved $6 million. And I could just go on in terms of our employees coming together, identifying solutions around care, quality, service, and really addressing those solutions. I would also say that's the partnership. But we also, as an organization, are committed to collaborating with unions and our employees, whether they're in the partnership or not. And much of our values around interests really rolls over into relationship with all of our unions. And we are very committed, and we bring forward, or they bring forward, this whole concept of being committed to interests. I was telling someone, and I'll be brief with this, that last night I was sitting kind of on my email, dealing with work and kind of anxious about today, and an email popped up from a group of EVS, environmental service workers, and housekeepers, cleaning individuals from our Antioch Medical Center. And I got chills because the email was to me, and it said, Mr. Adams, Greg, we are dealing with this particular issue. We've been working it in partnership, and it's not moving. And we know you're committed to our partnership, and we're asking you for your help. I sent an email to one of our leaders, asked them to engage, sent an email back to the team saying, you guys have got a meeting on Thursday. And I think that what I would say about that is, you know, it's great that they emailed me, but we try to create a culture where regardless of where people are in the organization, we celebrate their raising issues. We celebrate hearing their voices. And at the end of the day, we are leading in quality, we're leading in service, we're leading in affordability, and we're committed to doing more. And it is because we have employees that not only own the vision, but are involved daily in helping our organization really live into the vision.
Thank you, Greg. And that's actually a good segue to Amberine, who is a school teacher. Why did you get into teaching?
Good morning. My name is Amberine Kahn-Baker, and I teach at Rockville High School in Montgomery County, Maryland. And this is my 11th year teaching. So growing up, I had struggled with my identity. My parents immigrated here 40 years ago from Pakistan, and they really wanted me to go to college. And I didn't know how. I didn't necessarily have the resources to get there. My parents didn't know what a college application looked like, what FAFSA, what did that mean? They didn't know that. And so if I really wanted to go, I was on my own. And I was really involved in student leadership in high school. That's what engaged me in school and opened a lot of opportunities for me. And one of my teachers, he sat me down, Mr. Hunt, he sat me down one day and he handed me an application to American University. And he told me, Amberine, this is where you need to go. This is where you belong. And so I applied and I got in. I got a scholarship that covered 80% of my tuition. And while he showed me, you know, he helped me open that door, it was up to me to walk my path. And so when I started teaching, I saw that my students face the same struggles and challenges that I did. Their parents don't necessarily have the resources, the tools to get them to college. And so that's part of my job. I work with my students on a daily basis in the classroom. I look over their college application essays, which is what we're doing right now.
I'm familiar with that.
And you know, there's so many questions that students have, and they don't necessarily have the answers. And so, you know, there's a lot of discussions on how do you get a student there. So that's the biggest reason why I became a teacher.
Tell me about the Montgomery Institute, which was, I think, a partnership between the National Education Association and the Montgomery County Education Association.
The Montgomery Institute is basically groups of teachers across the country. They come to Montgomery County, Maryland, and they're with our association, and they learn how our the partnership between our union and our district. They learn how collaborative we are and how do we do that and what kind of programs we have in place and certain structures we have in place. So they learn all of that information, but they sort of focus on one particular issue that they want to address in their own district. So they come up with an action plan, something they can take back home, but they also focus on their narrative. How are they getting that issue addressed? How are they telling their stories? And so that's something that we really focus on with the Montgomery Institute, because narratives are very important. Teachers need to get their stories out there, because that's how we can address our students' needs.
How has your involvement in the teachers union helped you as a teacher, and how has it helped your students in the learning process?
The skills I learn outside the classroom, I bring directly into the classroom. So the teacher I am today, I definitely was not when I first started teaching. And for one example, I work with teachers in our district. I mentor them. I teach teachers how to become mentors. And so one way I do that is that I sit down in a session and I teach them how to use probing and clarifying questions to get another teacher to analyze and describe their lesson and to reflect on their lesson. Because we really want to improve the teaching and learning conditions of our students. So I teach them that, and there's a lot of strategies with that. And I take what I do with teachers directly into my classroom. I teach English, so my students write essays all the time. And in particular, one of my students, Manuela, she would come to me every single week with her essay, and she'd give me her essay at lunch and ask me, Ms. Kahn, what do you think is wrong with this essay? And what do you think? And I'd sit down with her because I want her to understand and for her to reach her own conclusions about her writing. So I use the same probing and clarifying questions with her. And in our discussion, there's this moment that her face would just light up, and she had that aha moment, that magical moment when a student has grasped a concept. And right there I could see, okay, she understood, she knew what she needed to do next. And I had her for 2 years, and in those 2 years I could see her self-confidence building and her writing skills improving. And it's really because of these techniques, and it's directly of what I've learned in all of my projects with our union. So whatever I've learned outside of the classroom and whatever projects, opportunities I have with our union, whatever skills I've learned, I just take that directly into the classroom, and which has directly impacted my students.
When you add up all the hours you spend in it, not just going to school during school, and then all the things you're doing after school, grading papers, mentoring, et cetera, what's a typical work week for you?
Oh, probably at least 60 plus hours a week.
A labor of love. Judging from your body language, it sounds like a labor of love.
Definitely.
Great. Robert, welcome. It's good to have you here. Is this your first trip to the White House?
Yeah, this is my first trip to the White House.
Are you a little bit nervous?
No, sir, not at all.
Excellent. That's great. Hey, Robert. Robert, you live in Mississippi?
Yes, sir. Live in Mississippi.
And you work at the Nissan plant?
Yes, sir, I do.
Great. What's that button you got on there?
This button right here on my jacket is a saying that we got. It's a saying from the Lord's Prayer: "Lead us not into temptation."
Why don't you tell the story that leads you to that button, Robert?
All right, good morning. How are y'all doing? That's good. I want to begin by saying thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here today and share my story. I'm deeply honored to be invited by Secretary Perez to be a part of this panel and speak at the White House. I was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. I attended Callaway High School, and I'm a proud father of a 6-year-old daughter. I also attend Anderson United Methodist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Currently, I work at the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi. I'm a production technician working in the light commercial vehicle department on the frame line. My job is to assemble the frame to the engine all the way to the rear axle. I work hard and I'm very proud of the work I do. I know my coworkers and I produce good quality vehicles. I began working at Nissan, but as an employee of Kelly Services. I worked almost 2 years before I was transitioned over to become a Nissan employee through the Pathways program. The Pathway program moves workers from working from Kelly Services to actually working for Nissan, but as a permanent temp or a permanent temporary worker. That means although I've been transferred from Kelly Services over to a Nissan employee, I'm still making the same pay that I was when I was a temporary worker for Kelly Services. I make $14 an hour now, and I will top out after 5 years at only $18.35. Nissan workers earn $24 an hour. Our Kelly Services and Pathway workers work side by side with full-time Nissan workers doing the same job, but top out at a much lower pay and benefits. In fact, we have to work 70 hours to earn what a Nissan worker does by doing the same job, working at 40 hours. We even had to train higher paid workers to do the same job we already know. In my mind, that's not fair. Just as this is one of the main reasons I'm having to organize a union at the Nissan plant.
Hey, Robert. Well.
And there are several other reasons I'm having to form a union in Mississippi at the Nissan, and they include, number one, health and safety. Many of the jobs are physically demanding, and there are lots of injuries. Injured workers are not treated fairly, and many are forced back to the same job that they were hurt on. Number two, all temps and Pathway workers should be treated the same as Nissan workers. Since we all work for the same company, doing the same job, the pay should be the same. Finally, I want a voice at work. This is one of the main reasons I want a union as employees. We want to be heard, not dictated to. But sadly, both Kelly and Nissan workers face a lot of threats as workers trying to organize a union. Workers are threatened by management at the union and often told that the plant will close and move to Mexico if the union comes in. When I was hired by Kelly, I was even threatened by management, told never to speak the word union or else I'll be terminated. When I went to cast my vote for President of the United States, I voted for Barack Obama twice, and no one threatened me. But with the union vote, there are many threats at Nissan. And Mississippi has a long history of fighting for the right to vote without threats and fear. Labor rights are civil rights. And in closing, I want to thank you again for the opportunity. I never imagined in my lifetime that I'll be invited to the White House and speak on such an important matter. And before I go, I want to leave you out with the slogan, one more time, off a phrase from the Lord's Prayer. And as you can see, I am wearing a button with this slogan. Nissan, lead us not into temptation. Let me say it one more time. Nissan, lead us not into temptation.
Well, Robert, quick, I want to ask one. I had the privilege of sitting with you yesterday, and the thing I remembered the most, and I want to just draw it out a little bit, when you were telling me about when you had to train a permanent worker recently on using, one of the machines, where you had, obviously, they had enough trust in you, so you're training a permanent worker who I assume is making more than you.
Right. On our line, we have several different workers, and it's mixed between Pathway, Kelly, and full-time. Throughout the day, we have like 4 job rotations. Not everybody knows how to do the same job. So myself and others, we have been issues where we've been trained the full-time workers. Even the Kelly people, Kelly Services, they have trained these full-time workers to do the same thing. And it goes throughout the whole plant on all lines.
What was going through your head when you were training that full-time worker?
I said, wow.
Okay. Great. Great. Joe, let me turn to you because the story of Market Basket really captivated the nation. And I had the privilege of meeting, with you and many of your colleagues a little over a year ago when I was following this story. And you started, and what I remember about the employees I met from Market Basket, I met a number of different folks up and down the chain. They They started in their teens and they stayed there for life. And
That's
you're
our
one of
story.
them. I know the story of Market Basket. You live the story of Market Basket, but many people don't know the story of what happened. So could you give us maybe the 3-minute version of that, and then I might have a follow-up question or two.
Sure, with pleasure. Labor Secretary Perez, distinguished members of the panel and audience, good morning. It's an honor to be here today representing our hardworking 25,000 associates that work together at Market Basket, the hundreds of vendors that we work with each day, and our 2 million customers that we serve each week. Market Basket is a food store that was established in 1917 by hardworking Greek immigrants that came to this country in search of opportunity. Today, we operate 3 distribution centers, 75 grocery stores, with annual sales approaching $5 billion in the 3 great states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. The Market Basket business model is simple. Offer the lowest prices, provide great service with the best overall value without sacrificing freshness, quality, or variety in the overall shopping experience. We believe in operating a reputable and socially responsible business with the right balance, doing what is in the best interest of all stakeholders. Our people-first culture, which was established by the late Mr. T.A. DeMoulas, who was our company president for almost 70 years, is based on respect for all. Part of respecting associates includes them sharing in the success of the company through a solid pay structure, bonus program, and profit-sharing retirement program. Equally important, it involves assisting others with achieving their goals within the organization. On June 23, 2014, our president, Mr. Arthur T. DeMoulas, was fired by a newly elected majority board of directors who, in our opinion, attempted to destroy the Market Basket culture. The objective of the majority board was to create liquidity at the expense of stakeholders without any care for the business model itself by raising prices, extracting cash that was put aside to grow the company, changing the profit-sharing program, halting capital spending, and hiring people from outside of the organization. As a result, associates at company headquarters banded together and respectfully placed 2 newly hired co-CEOs on notice. They were informed that we would not be taking direction from them due to their association with the board, and that associates wanted Mr. Arthur T. DeMoulas and the Market Basket philosophy reinstated. With silence from the board pertaining to our request, warehouse workers, truck drivers, and office associates walked out with a solidarity and pledged not to return until our president returned. The CEOs immediately took action and fired 8 key associates who were responsible for organizing one of our first rallies on July 18th, with the thought that this would cause everybody to go back to work. This was a major miscalculation about the Market Basket family. Within hours, 25,000 associates stopped working, vendors stopped delivering products, state representatives became involved, and our highly valued customers boycotted our stores. Sales plunged 90% within days, and the company was essentially shut down. What the board failed to recognize was that Market Basket is a company of the people and for the people. The community was not going to let that be taken away. For 6 weeks, customers, associates, and suppliers stood together, shoulder to shoulder, in support for each other. The people's voice was heard, and togetherness made a difference. In late August, Mr. Arthur T. DeMoulas and his family acquired the remaining shares of the company and reinstated the Market Basket institution that we know, love, and care deeply about. The moment a deal was finalized, associates rushed back to work, some in the middle of the night. Within days, our company was back online with most impressive fashion as our customers returned immediately. It was clear that something of great importance had occurred in the region and in this nation. Why is the Market Basket model successful, and why did the summer have a positive outcome? The answer is being in the people business first and the grocery business second, and that the power of the people is greater than the people that have the power. Thank you. Mr. Arthur T. DeMoulas has a strong belief in a guiding philosophy at Market Basket, and I quote, "No one person is better or more important than another, and no one person holds a position of privilege. We are all equal. Last year's events displayed people working together with the common bond of ensuring the continuance of a socially responsible company. When people work together, all things may be accomplished. We are proud to be here today, proud to be an American company, and proud of the preservation of the American dream. Customers, associates, and all stakeholders are proud to say that we are Market Basket, a company that is grateful to be a part of the community. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
In a moment, I'm going to get back, when I double back after our last speaker, I want to talk more about the issue of culture and ask a few questions about culture and voice and how we bring that together. But I want to turn to the very patient majority leader to my left, Senator Sanchez. You've been in the front lines in New Mexico, and we wouldn't be here today if everything was hunky-dory. There have been a lot of challenges out there. And one of the challenges has been that in a number of states where there has been historically the right to organize, there have been efforts to change that. And you were at the tip of the spear in terms of some legislation that was authorized, or that was proposed recently to make New Mexico a so-called right-to-work state. Tell us the anatomy of that, and people tend to read about the stories of right-to-work legislation that passed. Often ignored are examples of right-to-work legislation that did not pass, and New Mexico is that story. So tell us that story.
Well, first of all, let me just thank you, Mr. Secretary, for having me here. I'm actually very nervous, so, and I'm just proud as can be to be with these panelists. They're a distinguished group, and I'm honored to be with each and every one of them. I've got to thank you and the President as well for calling this summit. I heard you earlier say that it was the President's idea, and I believe the President has a lot of good ideas, and this is one of the best ideas around. I've got to tell you, I don't call it the RTW. I call it anti-worker legislation, and that's what it is. It's anti-worker legislation. And in New Mexico, just a brief history for all of you. New Mexico has been a Democratic-held state for many, many years. We now have a Republican governor, and we lost the House of Representatives this last year after 50-some years of control. So with that, the proponents of the anti-worker legislation really believed that they could force it down the throat of the Senate. And they used every angle they could. They introduced 7 different pieces of legislation. Those bills were referred. I get to refer bills to the committees. I referred them to committees that I knew were very strong and had legislators in there who believed in the unions, and they knew the truth about the anti-worker bills. We referred those bills to our Public Affairs Committee, which is chaired by a gentleman by the name of Jerry Ortiz-Pino, and we had a fabulous group in that committee who were able to hold those bills in the committee, and we call it tabling, which basically means those bills stay in the committee. We also referred it to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I am also a member of, and those bills never got that far. But the proponents used every procedural legislative angle they could to try to bring that or those bills down to the floor of the Senate. Those procedural moves are to have a motion on the floor of the Senate to bring it out of the committee, which is against our rules, which we don't generally do. We follow our process and procedure. We make sure that our bills go to the committee so they're vetted properly, and we respect the committee process. Well, there were at least 3 different times that I can remember that the proponents tried to bring those bills out of the committee to the floor of the New Mexico State Senate, and they were defeated soundly by the majority of Democrats on the floor. We were able to hold them up in committee. Those bills never hit the floor, and I will just tell everyone in this room, even though there were some doubts as to whether or not we would vote against the anti-worker bills, we had enough votes on the floor that if it had come down, those bills had come down, they would have been defeated soundly. We would have won that battle. But I've got to tell you, the battle's not over. I will guarantee you that this next legislative session, which is our 30-day legislative session, the proponents of these anti-worker bills will be back. Mm-hmm. And they are sponsored by out-of-state big corporations who really don't care about workers' rights. They don't care that those people in anti-worker states make less than $7,000 than the union people make. They don't care that there is insurance that protects those workers. They don't care about pensions. All they care about, and I heard you mention it earlier, is the bottom line and making the most instead of taking care of those workers. What we tried to do in New Mexico to try to let the public know that these were anti-worker bills and legislation was to tell them the truth about what it really stood for. And once the public heard it, and it's hard to get it out, when you don't have the bully pulpit and you're not on the news cycle 24/7, it's really hard to get the word out. But our labor brothers and sisters worked with us to organize. We went on the radio, we did editorial spots, we did some TV commercials. Our public sector union members, our policemen, our firefighters, our teachers, all worked with us to make sure that the public was educated and knew exactly what they were trying to do. One of the things that always bothered me, though, I will tell you, and this is for our business friends, they used the chambers of commerce to really try to put pressure on each legislator. And the chambers were so misguided because they just weren't thinking this through to understand that if you have a happy employee, your business is going to prosper more than anything else. And not worrying about that bottom line, but making sure that people are taken care of, making sure their families are fed, not having to worry about how they're going to pay the bills. Their businesses will prosper like never before. But for some reason, our chambers just didn't want to see that, and they were convinced by the misinformation that they were given that this type of legislation would be an economic development tool. And we know from the experts that it doesn't enhance economic development in any states. Big businesses, small businesses don't look to see whether you are an anti-worker state or not. They look for other factors. And those factors we made sure that the public knew, and we were very happy with the end result. And I've got to tell you, I'm just very proud of our Senate Democrats who stood strong. They stood together. The Power of One, if anybody has ever read the book, that's what the New Mexico State Senate Democrats did. We held firm. We were not going to be intimidated. We were not going to be threatened. We were not going to be bribed into letting this piece of legislation go through. So I'm really proud of what we did in the New Mexico State Senate.
Thank you very much. You know, you said something, Senator, that is actually borne out in an emerging body of research, which is that when workers have a meaningful voice in the workplace, it creates a virtuous cycle of bottom line success, success for workers, success for customers, success for the community. I was at the Duke Business School a while back, and we were talking about this. And meaningful voice comes in a number of different ways. And we see, even on this panel, there are different models of ensuring that workers have a meaningful voice. And what's remarkable is that when you have that understanding, and that's a first cousin of creating culture, and that's what I heard from a lot of people here. If you have good culture, you can create a virtuous cycle. The opposite can be true as well. And so I really want to focus on culture here for a few minutes, and ask a couple of you a couple questions on culture. Amberine, I've been a Montgomery County parent now for 14 years running, and a proud public school parent. And what is the culture that you have sought to create in your school setting, not just in the classroom, but through your involvement with the union, and how has it been manifested through concrete results?
We have a very collaborative nature in Montgomery County, and I think one thing we've been focusing on is our narrative, telling our stories, telling the story of us, because there's a lot of other voices out there, and there's a lot of people speaking on behalf of teachers. And teachers, we are working with students firsthand. We know our students' needs, and so this is where we are right now. We're trying to build that narrative and let people know this is our stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment. There are some out there who say teachers and teachers' unions are just looking out for their own selves, their own hide, and they're not looking out for students. And I would extrapolate that to other public sector workers, and that's part of the narrative. When you hear that, when you learn that at least one presidential candidate wants to punch union heads somewhere in the body, I don't know where. I didn't quite ask. I haven't asked the question, but I'll get specific if necessary. How does that make you feel?
It's very negative, of course, and so I have to speak from my personal experience in that the union has helped me, has opened opportunities for me, has helped me become a teacher leader, and and that directly affects my students. A particular example. In our union, we work to seek out teachers and cultivate them as leaders, and have them identify their voices and have them acknowledge their experiences and share their experiences. And so then I do the same thing with my students in yearbook. I work with my students to cultivate them as student leaders. And so that's pretty much the work that I focus on.
Great. Greg, how would you, if you had to give in 2 sentences or 3 sentences, describe the culture of Kaiser, how would you describe the culture of Kaiser and the role of worker engagement in creating that culture?
Sure. It's hard for me to do anything in 2 or 3 sentences, but I'll try. Kaiser has always been this amazing, inclusive organization. It just is. The CEO of our organization keeps the American flag on his desk in any meeting room he's in, and he waves it, and he waves it because he is saying he wants a diversity of voices, and he articulates to the organization that he wants a diversity of voices coming up from within the organization. I think we're not perfect. We talk about people having kind of drank the Kaiser Kool-Aid, because it is an amazing organization to come into. A lot of people don't do well, especially leaders, because they're not used to that we're empowered when our staff are empowered. So, healthcare and hospitals, it's more than 3, are hierarchical, and we're very intent on kind of breaking through those levels of hierarchy and making sure that our employees, everybody, has a sense of and understand how they are able to communicate. And, I would say, and I'll be quiet, is that being challenged by an employee, being offered another perspective. It goes back to the experience with Market Basket. We only lead if people are following. And I have a personal belief that people give us permission to lead them. And so we, as an organization, really are connected to not only our employees' voice, but our employees helping us own this culture, because it is about what they experience. We can define whatever we want to say this is our culture, but our employees, what they experience in the organization is what they understand to be the culture of the organization. So it's about creating experiences that really unleashes their potential and gives them the opportunity to not only solve, but to help own the problems and the opportunities.
As the person who has the privilege of leading a 16,000, 17,000 person organization, I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I've seldom had an original idea in my life.
Right.
And
most of us
and
have
success is about being a good listener, right, and listening to the frontline workers who know so much. I couldn't help, as I was sitting there and listening to Robert, followed by Joe, to ask you the following question, Joe, because You know, again, I followed Market Basket, and you know, the good Arthur at the end, he said, you know, by working together and only together do we succeed. And that to me embodies the culture that he's tried to create. How could, let me ask you a hypothetical question. What if you had 2 workers at Market Basket doing the same task? One of them had all the full benefits that you would enjoy, and one of them was a permanent temporary employee who would get a fraction of those benefits. How would that connect with the culture that you have tried to create at Market Basket?
Well, I think the answer there is that we wouldn't have that situation at Market Basket because we believe very much that the people that work in the company are the company, and the company is the people. And what would transpire would be, in that scenario, which again wouldn't happen, is that you would have
Did he say it wouldn't happen?
You would have managers that would be talking to other managers, to supervision, and people would understand that's not the right thing to do, that's not the right way to treat people. And that's the simple answer on that.
And Sarita, when I was asking that question, I was watching out of my left corner of my eye your body language. Tell me what you were thinking.
I have a lot of thoughts on culture.
Yeah.
You know, it is so important. This piece about storytelling, I think, is critical to how we think about pathways forward. And the reason is because people are struggling to survive in our economy right now. And the reality is that our workplaces are so spread out that people often can't connect with each other and find the common threads of our stories, right? Where we connect on key issues. So I think there's so much to be done on this question of creating culture and culture change. We actually have to change the conversation about what worker voice is about. We actually have to shift our values proposition here. Like, we're up against, you know, what we're doing is very counterculture. We're in a culture of individualism. Everyone can do it on their own. And here we are saying, actually, people need to stand together and fight for change. And there's a way in which we get caught in process and procedures. And what we miss is actually the hearts of what people need and want in order to have a better life. And so I think storytelling and constantly grounding our approaches and our strategies in values is so important right now to reclaim the values of what it means to be in community, what it means to be interdependent. You know, and I think we're learning a lot through caring across generations and how we do that in the context of care and actually valuing and recognizing a care economy is an example of that. That as we are a rapidly aging nation, more and more people will need supports from home care workers. How do we help home care workers and consumers see that they have a common interest here in designing a system that really meets the needs of all our families? All of our families and all the home care workers' families together, right? This goes back to your point, when we all do well, we all do well. But I think culture change is such an important way in which we help people experience what it means to all do well together, that it is in fact possible.
Senator?
Yes, first, when you say you were the aging community, you looked at me and I felt kind of bad about that, but I got you, I understand. And I'm
I
getting
thought
up
she was
there.
looking at me.
I'm getting up there. But you know, we all learned our values from probably our parents. And I'm going to tell you, I grew up in a small town, and my mom and dad owned a bakery and restaurant. And they always made sure that the employees that were working for them were paid a livable wage. Not a minimum wage, but a livable wage, which a lot of people don't understand today. Mm-hmm. And somehow, some way along the line, and my mom and dad worked for 40 years, and I told a story last night that my dad used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and stay at the bakery and restaurant till 10, 11 o'clock at night, come home, then get up the next day, go work, and when the help didn't show up, of course, he had to be there even longer hours. But that's what instilled us with understanding that if you take care of your employees, if you listen to what their needs are, and you understand where they're coming from, and they're not worried about paying the bills, and they have some leisure time to enjoy their families, that's the greatest asset in the world. And my children, and my wife was a teacher, and when you were talking about teachers and she's sitting here on the front row, I get to look at her and smile at her. When you were talking about teachers and how hard they work, the teachers in New Mexico have been demonized by these outside groups, and I've got to tell you, it's a shame, because I dare any of those people, I dare them to go to our public schools and spend time in a classroom and do what our teachers do. They can't do it. They won't do it. I can remember times when my wife, she's a retired teacher now, would come home, she'd get up early, go to school, teach the kids, come home, not pay any attention to me at all, and work on lesson plans and call parents and talk to students. And they are the most dedicated group that I've ever seen in my life. And for what's happening to them in today's world is just, it's unbearable to me. And we need to change how we approach it. You know, these proponents all have these bumper sticker slogans that are real cute. People can address them in a few lines. And it's hard for us to explain everything that's going on with our unions and how hard our union workers. You know, if we didn't have the unions, where would we really be? Where would this country be?
They did bring us the weekend.
Yeah, they did bring us the weekend. Social Security, 40-hour work weeks, the insurance. I mean, really, where would we be? And we just need to, this culture, because we sit back and let the proponents of these anti-worker types legislation carry the debate. We need to be stronger, we need to be more vocal, and telling your stories is absolutely fabulous. And I'm going to take my stories back to the state of New Mexico. By the way, I have to say New Mexico is the greatest state in the union, and if you want to organize your businesses, please come to New Mexico anytime. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, you know what? I said to you a little over an hour ago that I predict that at times you will be very frustrated, you will be saddened, you will be maddened, and you will be inspired by our panelists. And I predict that you've had all of those emotions as we have gone through this hour-long discussion. I want to say thank you to all of you. Robert, I want to start out by saying thank you to you, because for you, your mere presence here is an act of courage. And I want to say that. Yeah.
I want to thank you too for allowing me to come speak, because it was real important to me, not just for me and my coworkers, but for everybody that's going through the same situation of what we're going through, because we're just trying to make everything better.
Well, and your presence is going to help making things better, and that's why I'm so grateful. And Joe, thank you as well. And again, what I learned from you is, again, the importance of culture. And culture starts at the top, and it permeates the organization. And when you have leaders saying that by working together and only together do we succeed, that's the culture that can enable us to build a virtuous cycle. And we see it. And the question I wanted to answer, the questions that our friends at Kaiser embodied through Greg have pointed out is that when you listen to your workers and when you create structures that enable you to listen, it's not only enabling workers to have better terms and conditions of employment, it's lowering costs for patients, it's lowering costs for the country, it's increasing quality. And so there's a value proposition that I heard you articulate in what you say. And I have kids at Blair High School. I'm sad that I don't have a kid at Rockville High School, because I'm confident that they would be remarkably inspired by you, Amberine. And I can't help but say, somebody wants to punch unions, I want to give you a hug and say thank you. That's what I want to do. And Sarita, you have spoken to both the challenges and the successes. And when I look in the audience and I see Aijin and I see Dorian and I see so many other people out there either working at a grassroots level. I see so many business leaders who are part of this. You mentioned caring across generations, and we could spend an hour talking about care.com, and we will this afternoon, because we have the CEO about 4 rows back. Again, a remarkable business partnership. And what they've done there is what I heard people say. There was a guy, Leon Sullivan, who was one of the first African Americans to serve on the board of GM, a remarkable civil rights leader, a leader in the effort to divest from South Africa. He developed what were called the Sullivan Principles of doing business in South Africa. And what I've heard over the last hour, in effect, as we continue the conversation, hashtag start the conversation, hashtag shared prosperity, hashtag we can do better, hashtag we will do better. What I've heard in this conversation and what I see in the work that people are doing all over this country is the articulation of a set of principles, Sullivan principles in effect, for inclusive capitalism. I am here today, and as we speak, there's a conference in Austin, Texas that I had to decline, but I'm going to continue. And it's a conference of business leaders who are all united by a desire to build a stakeholder model of governance. People like the head of the Container Store, who has a business model that is exactly what we're discussing here, the culture of people first. When you invest in your human capital, we all succeed. And so it seems to me that perhaps part of the work streams that are going to flow from today, and thank you for bringing a reality check to this, Senator, at the front lines, and thank you. I met you on the phone when we were working together on that legislation, and I knew you were a leader then, and I know you're an even greater leader now, and we have an investigation underway as to whether you lowered the retirement age in New Mexico because your wife is too young to be retired, but that's a different topic. And what we're taking away from this, I think, is the beginning of the development of these, in effect, Sullivan principles for inclusive capitalism. And one of those principles that has really been hammered home today in this session is that when workers have a meaningful voice, we have shared prosperity. And we've got to return to that. That's a basic value proposition. And I think we can get there because we've got a remarkable set of folks here and elsewhere who I think strongly believe that. So thank you for leading us off. We're going to take a break for a little while, and the president will join us shortly. And so can you give a round of applause to our wonderful set of panelists?